Good evening. You're very welcome back to our programme here as we discuss all things Ulster-Scots. I'm Alistair Patterson and I'm delighted here to be joined this evening by two very well-known members within the Ulster-Scots community. I'm delighted to have with us here Matthew Warwick, who is with the Ulster-Scots Community Network, Education Officer, former primary school teacher, and I'm sure there's a few other topics and things that Matthew's involved in as well that we'll cover within our discussions. But Matthew, you're indeed very welcome with us here
Thank
this
you,
evening
Alistair.
for this programme. Also delighted to be joined by Brian Wilson. Brian, who is the director of the now well-established Belfast International Tattoo. Brian, former drum major as well, or maybe say current drum major, because I have seen you in action over the last few weeks, but it's good to see you here as well, Brian, and we're delighted to have you on this programme as we discuss all things Ulster-Scots.
Thanks, Alistair.
Given what's going on currently within the United States of America, what can we try to do now to try to get our message over there into the US, to try and, get Ulster-Scots onto that stage as such?
That's an interesting question, Alistair. We're fast approaching the semi-quincentennial of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. That's a new word I've learned recently, by the way.
I was going to say, could you say that again?
The semi-quincentennial, the 250th anniversary, of course, the 4th of July, 1776, the Declaration of Independence. There are Ulster-Scots or Scots-Irish fingerprints all over that. I think it's not just in terms of the current political situation in America, but in terms of our own links and particularly cultural tourism, heritage tourism here in Northern Ireland. In the summer, I'm very busy in the Discover Ulster Scots Centre in Belfast, Monday to Friday, and we have dozens, scores of American visitors on a daily basis. And many of them are wanting to come in to find out about their ancestry, to find out about their family, to find out about the historical reasons why they left Ulster to seek new opportunities in the new world from the early 1700s right through to the late 19th century. So there are so many connections.
Yeah, and that's something that that we as Ulster Scots, we have to tap into that at some stage, and that's how we can try to push that, and it's where we can go with that.
I think it's important to show that our sort of colonial cousins have, they were baked in the same bowl, if you pardon the wee sort of colloquial phrase, that their experiences as a migrant community has led them to where they are. To understand where you're going, you have to understand where you've come from.
Yeah.
And we need to pay attention to our history, and we have a shared history with those folks, particularly in North America, and not just the United States, but also Canada as well.
But I know, from experience, and Brian, you would have experienced this as well on your travels, particularly within, the pipe band world or within the band world. The culture, the heritage, everything that's there. There's one thing that Americans love, and that is, it's getting involved in something, as we have seen, particularly within, say, the pipe band world, is one thing. But it's about trying to get that from ourselves, and how we get into that market as well, and how we.
I think that mentality right across the United States is something that we don't do as well. Yeah. They are wanting to be the first, the best at everything they do, from school level right through to go to the White House. I think, when you talk to kids in America, there's no middle ground with them. They want to be the very best of the best that they can be, and that seems to be bred into them in schools. But you're right about, when I've travelled extensively across America, and everybody wants to be either Irish or Ulster Scots. They really buy into it. But do we do that well here? I don't think so. At school levels, if I asked my nephews and nieces when I knew I was coming on this panel, did they know anything about Ulster Scots? And they're 15 and 14. And they really didn't know much about it because they're not being taught that grassroots Ulster Scots history at school. They're still being taught stuff that maybe I would have said irrelevant to me at that stage. But yeah, I think we need to go back to grassroots levels.
And that's coming back to us as people, and Matthew, you're the perfect person to be here, as an education officer within our Ulster-Scots Community Network as such. How do we try to inject that, I'm not saying the knowledge, but even just that we as Ulster-Scots people take pride in it and actually try to, to love what we are, and you've acknowledged that, we need to sort of embrace it and take it on and champion it at every possible opportunity.
Yeah, I think it stems back to our sort of education system, and like my limited short teaching career before I went to the Ulster-Scots world. I have a history degree from Queen's. I specialised in teaching history in my PGCE, but I ended up, you go into primary school, you teach about Vikings, you teach about Egyptians, you teach about Mesolithic and Neolithic man. There has been a nervousness for our control schools in particular to latch on to anything historical or cultural to do with the local community for fear of it being divisive and highlighting differences. But I would argue that that's led to ignorance, and it's led to a lot of really ignorant stereotypes filling the void.
I know in our previous discussion on the previous show, we talked about, how do we make Ulster Scots cool? How do we get it out there? How do we get people that are really getting the buzz for it?
Yeah, and it's not a hard sell when you actually get through the door into the school. The kids latch on to it.
Yeah.
So, if I'm talking about history, if they see their surname has been here since the early 1600s, immediately you've got a hook.
Yeah.
That's my surname. That's something that I write every day on my books. That's something that my family have. You have them as soon as you have that. Those opportunities only come about through the principal or the teachers in the school inviting the Ulster Scots Agency or the like of myself in to do programmes. It is not it is not mandatory, it's not compulsory, it's voluntary. Now, there's great appetite for it,
Yeah.
and long may that continue. But there is this inference that if something is not mandatory, it's therefore not important. It's something that can be pushed to the side, and it's not mainstream. And that's where we're at with Ulster Scots, unfortunately.
But anyway, I'm going to drag it back to the US, and I'm going to drag it back to sort of, the heritage, the culture, even the tourism. And you've mentioned we have something there that people are genuinely interested in. But it's how we can, how do we fund this? How do we make this better? How do we make this bigger? How do we go about trying to get that sorted and moved on and funded?
That is the big question.
We'll be here for the next hour
and
talking about that.
Especially at a time whenever there's not a lot of spare cash floating about Stormont or Westminster or whatever else. Every pound's a prisoner, and there are big ticket items, particularly like the NHS and everything, that rightly should be demanding the full attention of our political representatives.
Yeah, we have to.
But at the same time, we can't forget culture. It's an interesting time. There is an Ulster Scots strategy that will be put to the executive at Stormont within the next few months. Okay. It's a 20-year plan for the development of Ulster Scots, in terms of language, culture, tourism, all the things that we've sort of touched on today. I think we really have a product. We have something that is important for tourism, but it's something important for ourselves, our community, to give us a sense of place that explains where we've came from, explains the situation where we're at, and also how we can develop and how we can adapt to survive into the future.
Yeah. Well, like Brian, you've seen through the International Tattoo, you brought in lots of people from overseas. Are they embracing our culture as such, as in, this Ulster Scots setup that we have?
Yeah, I believe they're embracing it. Actually, yesterday I took a phone call from Brisbane, Australia, and a gentleman, and I think he said he was 83, is coming specifically for the tattoo. Okay. And then he's spending 3 weeks in Belfast to see, do some ancestry and look at other music and culture stuff. So yes, the tattoo does have a big draw internationally. I think one of the statistics we could throw about a couple of years ago was, out of the 3,000 people outside Northern Ireland who visited the tattoo over the 3 days, 1,800 people were from outside the United Kingdom.
Okay.
coming from as far as China, which is bizarre, Australia and the Americas to come and see the tattoo. So music's a big draw, and I think we don't emphasize that enough within our tourism end. I think they could be promoting us a lot more overseas, both the tattoo, which would be wonderful for me, but all of the music genres in Northern Ireland. And you do see for, the marching band community, there is a draw now of them to come to see that, especially around the 12th.
Yeah.
You just listen to the interviews that the BBC done this year, and there was a lot of international guests on the ground watching our marching bands. But yeah, we do get a lot to the tattoo, but the guests that come for the tattoo this year, there's 185 international guests coming to the tattoo, and they're not just staying for the tattoo. Some of them are spending an extra week here. Again, travelling around, they'll spend a little while in Northern Ireland, and then they'll head towards Dublin to sort of get both fields of both areas. So yeah, it's an interesting dynamic of what they want to see, but music's a big part of it.
Yeah. Is there more that our elected representatives as such could be doing to sell this on a bigger stage, on a bigger platform, getting that Ulster-Scots message out there?
If we go back to the sort of the American connections and looking up to this big anniversary, we can't sell short in this. We only get one chance at hitting the 250th anniversary. It's a nail to hang something significant on in terms of a draw for international tourism, particularly from the United States. Yes, because so many of our super council areas have some connection with some historical figure or whoever it may be that they may be able to tie into. So if you think of Derry and Strabane, you go straight away there. You could go Woodrow Wilson. As a president, his grandfather was from Strabane. But thinking of the Declaration itself, John Dunlap, the printer of the Declaration that was able to distribute it throughout 13 colonies, he was from Strabane as well, proprietor of the Pennsylvania Packet newspaper, America's first daily newspaper, significant character, but many people around the doors know about him. The dollar sign was invented by Oliver Pollock from Breedy, just outside Strabane. Again, I'm appealing to your County Tyrone nature here. But, the man that invented one of the most recognisable symbols in the world, but he was also a financier of the American Revolutionary Movement. But how many people know of his story here?
And
we have
that's
these
the thing.
connections, they're myriad. For instance, there's so many things that can happen that you can tie into. For instance, the presidential race. We've looked at the characters involved in some of their Ulster-Scots ancestry. A big event in America not that long ago was the bridge in Baltimore being hit by the ship.
Yes.
The Francis Scott Key Bridge. And that bridge was named after the gentleman who came up with the Star-Spangled Banner, America's national anthem, which was inspired by events in Baltimore of a battle over Fort McHenry. And who was Fort McHenry named after? James McHenry, Ballymena man.
So again, good strong Ulster-Scots.
Good strong, and he was this was a significant person. But who here knows about him? He was involved in the U.S. Constitution. He was George Washington's Secretary for War. This is a significant figure in American history, born and bred here in Northern Ireland. But how many people here know about that? And again, there's so many of these connections, and it's not just politics. It's every sphere of life. It's literature. So if you think of Mark Twain, Edgar Allan Poe, John Steinbeck, huge Ulster-Scots connections, Ulster connections. If you think of film, you have Jimmy Stewart, you have John Wayne. If you think of, and here's something we don't often touch on, cartoons. Maybe I'm appealing to my own sensitivities and growing up on Saturday morning cartoons and everything. But like Tom and Jerry, Scooby-Doo, Fred Flintstone, what do they all have in common? Hanna-Barbera. Well, the Hanna part of that partnership was William Hanna of Presbyterian Ulster stock. So, you don't have to go far to find these connections. How do we sell them? Okay, there's a Northern Ireland Bureau who have a political remit in Washington, particularly down to trade and everything else. But I think it needs to be further than that. I think there needs to be something like a special section within Tourism Ireland, of which Northern Ireland Tourist Board is a small subsection, and there needs to be something dedicated in that to look at this anniversary and further anniversaries coming forward to celebrate the Ulster fingerprints all over American history.
We're going to take a few minutes here. We're going to change the mindset. We're going to change the direction we're going in, but we're going to focus a bit more on education. And we did touch on it. And I know, Matthew, you come, originally a primary school teacher. But it's one of the things that we find within our Ulster Scots setup within our communities that, particularly children from that Ulster Scots background, we sometimes, the education system at times seems to be failing us some of the times. And, is there more that we can do, or what can we try to do to influence that and try to get our education system, that wee bit better, particularly thinking on boys?
Yeah, it's one of these statistics that gets constantly sort of rolled out. I think it's important maybe to address that there's maybe a very, very large urban-rural divide in that narrative. There's been a disconnect from certainly youngsters and children and boys and young men from PUL background in those urban areas to learning and to education. Is that because of the Troubles? I don't think they have, despite it being so long after the Belfast Agreement and everything else, I still think a lot of those communities haven't got to grips with the end of the Troubles and problems with paramilitarism and the things that have happened there, and transitioning out of a society at conflict. And it's to do with influence, it's to do with the people who have the voices, it's to do with setting examples. It's a difficult situation.
Like if we sort of take, particularly within, our Ulster Scots communities, and we take, the activities now that we're putting forward in a lot of our hubs and a lot of our, basically our Orange Halls and a lot of our church halls, whatever, throughout the country. Is that one way that we can look at to try and engage our young people and get them involved? I know it's not directly into education, but see, when they find an interest and they start to get involved in it, it sort of develops them in other ways. How are you finding that from a tutoring and a teaching point of view?
Well, as I say, I teach pipe band drum majors, or any drum majors for that matter, but the way I approach it to them is the opportunities that drum majoring has given to me in my 30 years. I'm one of those...
Just 30 years?
30-ish years. Cut Alistair out completely. All right, my 36 years as a drum major, and the international travel that I've done, and I have taken groups internationally, and I think it was the best education for a lot of those kids. Some of those kids, and we're talking about areas from Belfast. I remember one young woman I had over in America, and she'd never been out of Northern Ireland, never been in a boat, never been in a plane, and I flew her to San Francisco and competed. And I had 26 changed young people come back with me, both, I think they matured, they had a different understanding of different religions and nationalities, because we're very closed in here at times here in Northern Ireland. And the one thing, I'll never forget it, as a young drum major when I went internationally. I went to America, and I was in a heat of drum majors, of 5 drum majors, and I was the only white drum major in the heat. And it was, my goodness, I've never competed against children from different nationalities, backgrounds. And I like to think that I could have exposed the groups that I've taken away to different things overseas, and I think it's a huge education for them. And I've done that about 6 or 7 times in 4 or 5 different countries. But again, talking back to Matthew mentioned goals, I set out goals in my own career when I was 18. I wanted to work on a cruise liner, I wanted to work in Australia, and I wanted to work in Gleneagles. It took me till I was over 35 to achieve them all, but I was driven to make sure that I achieved those goals in life. And then for personally in my competitive life, I wanted to be successful as a drum major. And it took a long time and a lot of work, but I had that goal. I wanted to be the world champion. I wanted to be the best of the best. But yeah, the goal was there at all times, and I was striving for it at all costs, from everything.
And that again, like that's, we do talk about education, but we also talk about those things, and it's sometimes it's about the life. We always talk about the University of Life in general within this country and as people, but it is all those things that add up. It's all those things that make us better as people. But it's about it's about getting into that, ticking the box. Everybody isn't going to be a world champion, but equally giving them that opportunity to try it out and to be part of it and to feel part of what we are.
I think something we need as an Ulster Scots people, community, whatever you want to call it, is we need to have career paths for young people who are engaging in our cultural traditions. So be it through pipe bands, be it through Highland dancing, any of our other marching bands and whatever else. There's so much activity happens there on a voluntary, unpaid capacity.
Yeah.
And if we want to grow and develop our culture, our product, so we can sell it to a wider world, we need people in place in paid positions that can make that happen. So you have someone who is a fantastic performer, a fantastic piper, musician, whatever else. Currently, how can they benefit from that?
And again, like that music and that's the great thing that the Belfast International Tattoo is now sort of putting out there. It's bringing and putting people on that stage so that people can come along and enjoy it.
But not only bringing people in, it's getting our local bands to mix with those
Yes.
international guests, and there's that camaraderie and that desire to travel and see other events. And tattoos are all over the place, but there's lots more to the music world out there than just tattoos. There's DMC's another great event in Europe. Lots and lots, but our bands are mixing with these guys and getting them ideas. So we could do this, we could do that, and just expanding their whole horizon of music.
If we look at the well-being, some of what we do within our culture helps people's well-being, and it's about getting that. That'll help. And is that something that we can maybe work on?
Yeah, the mental health benefits of speaking personal. I'm a bandsman,
Yeah.
and have been since the age of 8. And during lockdown, the one thing that I missed more than anything else was my weekly band practice. It wasn't performing on a stage. It wasn't competing in a competition. It was in the hall, sitting with, maybe a dozen or 2 dozen other musicians making music on a weekly basis, just for our own enjoyment, rehearsing for whatever the function was going to be. And I think we undersell the importance of that. That we have a marching band movement here of somewhere between 700 and 800 bands. It's always in flux. It's hard to put a finger on it. But the well-being in terms of that, and sort of to holistic well-being. So mental health, people, rural social isolation, coming together. It's intergenerational. People from all different ages and backgrounds coming together for the one purpose of making music together, and it's brilliant. And we sell ourselves short every time.
Yeah, and I think we do sell ourselves short, and that's why I'm bringing in that, because I do, we talk about health, but it is this well-being.
It's a mentality where, as a people, we do not say, we demand this money, we deserve this money. It's not in us. And until we have this sort of attitude change and shout it from the rooftops, this is ours by right, this is our culture, these are our traditions, look at the benefits of this. We must have this money. Now, hopefully the Ulster-Scots strategy, if the executive decides to fund or implement even part of that, will help that.
Yes.
And it will help us put more people in career paths in wider Ulster Scots. We need positions, paid employment, we need security. not just a 6-month contract, people in 3 or 5 year posts that allows community development to take a small acorn and allow it to grow and branch off and go into other directions.
You know, you've hit the nail on the head there about, you know, if you put the investment into it, it develops even more, you know. So we as people, like, you know, what can we do to try and push this and make it better? Or is it a case of we need to stand up and more or less shout that this is what's needed and this is helping in so many ways?
So our Joe Public doesn't seem to have a voice, and it's up to our political representatives to come together and unite on these fronts. I believe that they have a stronger voice to go to government and saying, we demand. And sometimes I feel, as someone from really rural South Armagh, that we don't have a voice because our political representatives are not standing together on issues, really important issues, that will get us money and will get us recognition through Ulster-Scots.
Yeah. Like, I know we're talking about, you know, just mentioning these community hubs, and a lot seem to be developed just by ourselves. Groups coming together, developing, set up, get a constitution, all of a sudden they can target and get a couple of grants. You know, that seems to be the first, you know, focus. But it's about making them that they are centres of education, centres of health and well-being, centres of development, centres of bringing, you know, Ulster Scots right to the forefront within our community, you know. And it's how do we develop that more?
One of the big proposals in strategy is that there would be a sort of hub in every super council area, and that would give you a real good geographical spread.
Yeah.
And if you had the right people, it's about getting the right people into those positions as well, with the dynamism and the energy to make things happen. But if they were going there with an agenda and a budget and all with a similar sort of remit and what they were wanting to promote, now it's never going to be the same.
Yeah.
I'm from County Antrim. I'm from an Ulster-Scots speaking area. Language is very, very important to who I am, where I'm from. But I know that's not the same for somebody in maybe South Armagh or Fermanagh. You know, it's a very regional phenomenon, Ulster-Scots language. Yes, we've got lots of words that we all use right across the province. But, you know, in terms of poetry and heritage, you know, East Antrim and Down have a lot of pedigree there, and there's still a great interest in it. So that's not going to be the same in urban Belfast. But in terms of the cultural activity, music and dance and everything else, it's something that everybody has. And in terms of history as well and heritage. So there are lots of things there that hubs could do in unison, all working if they had a sort of mission statement and goals of where to be within, you know, the initial 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, wherever it may be.
Thank you very much, Matthew and Brian. We've had a great discussion here around a lot of topics. Thank you very much for joining us here and discussing all things Ulster Scots. I trust that you have enjoyed everything that you've heard this evening, and we look forward to welcoming you back to our next programme.